We're rolling.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Alexander. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Great to see you guys. Look forward to this.
Nice to see everyone.
A little recapitulation of our last time, which seems ages ago, and then I'll do a little sort of arc of what this time is about.
Great.
Yeah, so last time we are just to remind us that we are reading GA2, and it's Steiner's presentation of the Goethean method. There you have it, Goethe's theory of knowledge, or has different titles.
Does.
Science of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And so last time we were discussing our reading of the preface and the first how many chapters? First three chapters
Mm-hmm.
that are grouped into a title called Preliminary Questions, where Steiner sort of sets up why he wanted to present Goethe's ideas and method and why they are relevant. And even as he puts it in the preface that he later wrote in 1924, how he still sees this as a very relevant text for the later development of anthroposophy and especially the way in which Steiner describes and presents his way of knowledge, what he will later call spiritual science. Yeah, so we had an interesting conversation around a few ideas, the difference between Goethean science and spiritual science, and let's see, it was a long time ago, so
It's been about
finding it
5-6 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
We had to postpone it a couple of times.
Finding it difficult to remind me of everything. Let's see if I can see something here in my notes.
Let's go from memory then. And one of the things that I remember quite a bit was the importance of Goethe being seemingly being supported by diametrically opposite personalities like Hegel and Haeckel and Schopenhauer and Hegel. These people, they're all able to say it's like Goethe supporting sort of like what I say, yet it's like these other personalities are in fundamental conflict with each other. And Steiner is coming from this perspective, saying this is because he has a completely different theoretical basis or worldview. Let's call it worldview. That's more accurate. From which he is working, which allows him to depict the world from different perspectives, which these other people are capable of recognizing, despite them only having a, for simplicity's sake, let's call it a more limited worldview, an understanding of what the world actually represents in terms of experience and thinking. That was one of the key things that I took away from the first three chapters there. Jeff, would you like to come in?
Yeah, he also spoke about the personality of Goethe, and I think this is extremely significant. I don't think it mirrors some of the other polarities that he brings out, like in Philosophy of Freedom, for example, the fundamental desire for knowledge and whether that's reliable, whether there are limits to knowledge, and subjectivity and objectivity. And then there's this important part of this is the character of of Goethe, because he becomes, in this worldview, he becomes the instrument for nature to work through him, for that which he's studying to work through him. That's why he can have this multiplicity of perspectives. So it brings the multi-perspectival and the personal together. It's seemingly ironic or paradoxical, because we are trained to think that our personality is a outgassing and a illusionary and even delusionary aspect of ourselves, and it is the very thing that limits our knowledge, as opposed to gives us the intimacy of perspective with that which we are engaged in. And I think that's the real meat of that last three chapters.
Hmm. And one of the ways in which we summarized it in that conversation was that it's like, it is the art of seeing. Goethe is seeing the world in a fundamentally different way from all these other scientists. They are looking in their own domains, but Goethe has got something else going on here, and this is the mystery that we're going to be digging into both today, and it's another aspect of it next time we meet. So being really understanding, what is it we're doing when we're seeing? It seems so obvious, seems such an obvious question, but it ain't. and it's taken humanity, the whole of humanity, to get this far, or to really begin to understand this fundamental relationship between what we will develop. It's like over the coming sessions, it's like different percept and thinking, experience and thinking.
Yeah.
And something else I now saw here in my notes, which I saw was interesting, is that, well, Goethe never presented he never really was able to present his way of seeing in a methodical way in which other people could take it on and repeat his experiments and his ways of studying nature, which is something that Steiner seems to have had as an important task, and that has developed afterwards in the 20th century with more Goethean scientists, how to present the Goethean method in a way in which people can share their observations and realizations and conclusions, so that it becomes a work, a science, a work of science that can have fruits in the world.
Yes, including education.
Yeah,
because I'm thinking of this very this very week. I was thinking about this in these terms because we've had some functions at the school, the Waldorf school, and the emphasis on, well, actually the best function we had was an assembly. They do an assembly at the end of the first half of the year, and they demonstrate emblematically what the children are doing in each grade, and it is a wondrous metamorphosis of developmental leaps, and the linchpin is art. Art is the method used in the science of education to bear the fruit of human development as a metacognitive science or something like that. These teachers are way ahead of their time in their practice, and it's so helpful that Steiner's able to give an explanation of this from an epistemological point of view, and then base all of anthroposophy on this, including biodynamics and the Goethean scientific method as practiced in like the Nature Institute and Waldorf education, and it's all so seamlessly alive and consistent.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce us to the chapters we're going to be looking at today, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll just say one final thing. I don't know if I went before or after our last meeting, but I went to see Dr. James Dyson at our Waldorf school, and he describes as relates to what Alexander was saying, of Goethe's inability to really do this meta move and describe his own processes as relates to the epistemology. And so it does not extend it into the spiritual science aspect, which is another thing we talked about, the creative polarity of the spiritual science and Goethean science. And then he describes that this is what Schiller's letters are about, letters on the aesthetic education of the human being. And then he describes Beethoven's Ninth as Beethoven taking Schiller's living interpretation of Goethe's methodology and putting it to music. Now, if that does not fulfill something extraordinary, and this is after Beethoven went deaf, right?
Yeah,
that he wrote this this powerful musical illustration of Goethe's scientific method. Art and science together, they can't be separated. And so, but in this next bit, we get to experience where the separation occurs and the necessity of it to some extent, though he doesn't like overtly say that. And he deals with a sort of threefold experiential. First of all, our science denies experience, right? So that's Evan Thompson wrote a book recently, and Matt Siegel talked to him about it. And they're talking about the gap, the major gap. They call it something, I forget what it is, but it escapes me now. But there's something missing in the modern worldview, and that gap is experience, because we deny experience as merely subjective. And so he deals with the way in which experience is a threefold reality that has us in relationship to the outer world. Then we have also an inner world in negotiating that, and the inner world itself is perceptually given, sensationally given, just as the outer world is given. I identify with those aspects of myself, but they involuntarily arise, as do the things that we usually think that the things that we've become familiar with as our lever into this process, but is still involuntary as relates to how we're fixed with the outer world. So on the one-sided, so then it's the next chapter where he brings in experience. He brings thinking in as a processual act that we engage in. But at this point, he's laying out the three ways in which experience is given, and concepts are, as long as they're bound to the physical world, and this is more than he's saying, it's just my way of trying to get around it. As long as our concepts are bound to the perspective of just the sensorial and the sensational, inner and outer, the concepts themselves are not. They're involuntary. They're just going to be formed. And he describes this as a multiplicity, not a nothingness, but a multiplicity of objects with no apparent relational connections. Right.
I'd like to.
Yeah.
So you finished there, Jeff?
No. I just that's the gist of it for me. So I would like that rounded out some.
You picked up on one of the important words that I wanted to develop, because this multiplicity is a word that he leaves out in the philosophy of freedom. He just talks about the unconnected or the relationless aggregate of sensory objects. That was the 87 translation there. But what's going on, what's really interesting here is he's really making crystal clear that he's not saying that it's that everything is the same. He's saying that there is really a multiplicity going on there, so that all of these different impressions are being received. It's both from the senses, from the eyes and the ears and sense, but also it's the inner life. He will go on later to talk about the talks about the appearance. This is where he ends up at the end of these chapters here. But with this multiplicity, he's really trying to get to the fact that we've got this huge variety, this multiplicity of unwanted in the sense that I was not active in their production of impressions going on, this multiplicity out there. But in the picture that he's presenting is none of these elements in this multiplicity begin to even be connected until thinking turns up on the screen, turns up, it's like on the in the book, in his thought concept. And this, I mentioned last time that there were several revelations that happened to me when I first listened to this book a couple of years ago. He really draws out, he gives you time to live into this idea, something that it just makes an appearance for 3-4 sentences in the Philosophy of Freedom, which is incredibly important to nail down, to get crystal clear in your head so that you can move on to the next thought. And he even uses this term, crystal clear. He says, my job here is to create clear contours, to delimit these spheres of experience. And one of the things that we're going to try to limit ourselves to a certain extent is what is going on with the experience. What is experience from Steiner's worldview, which also will allow him to develop this theory of epistemology, this theory of knowledge. But we've got to get clear about the difference between pure experience and what we'll be talking about next time is what thinking adds when it comes into this experience. And there will be a tendency today when we talk to mix in these parts here, but we really, the job, or one of our jobs as I see it today, is to keep these separate so we begin to experience themselves in their polarity nature, how it's like, yeah, obviously they do come together in the human being, but we need to sense how they are fundamentally different and complementary at the same time. So I'm really pleased you picked up on that world of multiplicity, which actually gets lost in the Philosophy of Freedom, and I think would have been of help, because they actually went for I mean, in the German is also, he uses Empfindungsobjekte, which is correctly translated into English as sensory objects, but multiplicity really gets across this idea. We're not denying there's any difference. There is loads of difference in pure experience. It's just there's no glue holding together all those different impressions there. And I'd like to add something to that thought, that specifically from the text I actually thought about reading something out and connecting it. But did you want to, either of you want to come back with a thought or a personal reflection about this word multiplicity in relation to the Philosophy of Freedom, or something else that was sparked?
For me, I think it would be interesting to start discussing a little bit how we see his idea of what pure experience is. Okay. Because I was a bit, I can see how he is really pushing the limits, as you were saying, of these two polarities, and taking us to one end of it, which is experience.
Yeah.
And through my own practice of Goethean study, I can relate to what he is talking about. But at the same time, I think it would just be interesting to unpack the idea a little bit, because as someone who as a human being that has sort of grown up and become an adult, I sometimes feel that pure experience is already a bit difficult to kind of grasp. I might think, okay, I had that when I was a child, but as an adult, I already have so many habitual and constructed thoughts and ideas about most of what I experience that it's seldom that I have an experience of pure experience. Maybe. So it would be interesting just to look into that in a bit different ways.
I love the way that you brought in another element intimately related to what you're saying that I wanted to add in relation to when I talk about Volkert. But it's a psychological truth of us all. When we were born, everything was just pure experience. We didn't have, this is a capacity that grows in us, and we are conscious of a world around us, but it's one great mystery because our life is continually about trying to make sense of experience. But the psychic truth or the psychological truth of us all is we all know this state from birth, and of course we've forgotten it. And I remember when Jeff and I we were looking at chapter 4 of the Philosophy of Freedom. We talked about it in terms of rediscovering the Edenic state. It might not have been exactly the words that I talked about, that I used then, but it's this idea that this psychological truth that is true for every single being, it's also at the beginning of the narrative of the Bible. And one way of understanding what Steiner is trying to encourage us to do is to rediscover that pre-fallen state artificially, because as you were saying, Alexander, we can't, it's difficult for us to put ourselves in that state. And one of the ways in which Steiner does that in this particular chapter, or chapter 5, I'm actually going to read out the whole. It's paragraph 8 of chapter 5, and I'll read out the whole thing, and then we'll have some reflection on what's going on here, because there's a lot of interesting detail here when you think on it. So just as an introduction, Volkert, for Steiner, he's a hugely important, and he recognized, he mentions several times in this text the importance and the relevance and the clarity with which Volkert describes this pure experience. He also points out that this took Volkert in a completely different direction. So he's continued to adhere to Kant, but nevertheless, there is exceptional value in the clarity that he created around this term pure experience. And that's what I'd like us to dig into a little bit here. So I'll read the text first, and then we'll see where it takes us. So chapter 5, paragraph 8. In our estimation, Johannes Volkert has succeeded admirably in sketching the clear outlines of what we are justified in calling pure experience. He already gave a fine characterization of it 5 years ago in his book on Kant's epistemology, and has then carried this subject further in his most recent work, Experience and Thinking. Now, he did this, to be sure, in support of a view that is utterly different from our own, and for an essentially different purpose than ours is at the moment. But this need not prevent us from introducing here his excellent characterization of pure experience. He presents us simply with the pictures which, in a limited period of time, pass before our consciousness in a completely unconnected way. Volkert says, now, for example, my consciousness has as its content the mental picture of having worked hard today, immediately joining itself to it is the content of a mental picture of being able, with good conscience, to take a walk. But suddenly there appears the perceptual picture of the door opening and of the mailman entering. The mailman appears, now sticking out his hand, now opening his mouth, now doing the reverse. At the same time, they join in with this content of perception of the mouth opening all kinds of auditory impressions, among which comes the impression that it is starting to rain outside. The mailman disappears from my consciousness, and the mental pictures that now arise have as their content the sequence: picking up scissors, opening the letter, criticism of the illegible writing, visible images of the most diverse written figures, diverse imaginings and thoughts. Connected with them. Scarcely is this sequence at an end, than again there appears the mental picture of having worked hard, and the perception accompanied by ill humour of the raining continuing, but both disappear from my consciousness, and there arises a mental picture with the content that a difficulty believed to have been resolved in the course of today's work was not resolved. Entering at the same time are the mental pictures: freedom of will, empirical necessity, responsibility, value of virtue, absolute chance, incomprehensibility, etc. These all join together with each other in the most varied and complicated way, and so it continues. One of the reasons why I think Steiner talks about this being a highly valid characterization is it really emphasizes the full range of experience minus the thinking that binds them all together. We, with our thinking, are able to bind. It's like the mailman suddenly is like popping up, and it's like auditory impressions and hands that's like reached out, and these different internal images that he has going on there. We are probably, the three of us sitting there listening to it, beginning to imagine an old 18th, 19th century like German house, Volker sitting in there. It's like, that's interesting. A postman just walking in the door. It's not going to happen today. We are putting the glue in between to make it all come together. But what Volker has done here is he said, I got this impression, this impression, this impression, this impression, and he's not trying to connect it. He's only connected it in a time sequence. And this is why I think it's so useful to really get our idea of what pure experience it is. It is the whole of life minus the ability to connect the dots, to connect the different impressions that are going on here. And included in there, he says thoughts. So it's not, thoughts are also pure experience, and we will be dealing with that problem so like next time we talk. But this is the richness of pure experience. Any thoughts, any comeback, any further reflections?
I do, but this was Alexander's question. So if you have some new understanding or inspired or further questions, that would be.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, just I think just going back to, I mean, I agree with you, Angus, that it's a bit artificial to think that we can have the same experience we had when we were born, because we have already developed thinking. And in this description that you're giving, mean, saying that it is the mailman is already an interpretation of.
Mhm.
So we could go down that alley in a way and try to see, I mean, how pure can our experience be? I think what I sort of felt is that maybe it can never be. I mean, maybe it can never be that pure as Steiner is trying to push it here, especially in the way when he gives this image of the let's see, where is it, of the homogeneous plane, where everything is sort of valueless in the world of phenomena, which for me, I mean, that is the limit where the self or the thinking self sort of vanishes in a way, because it's only without consciousness can the world of phenomena be completely equal in terms of value. But I'm going to give an example to why I'm here saying that, and I wanted to show you something, but please,
okay, I'll wait.
No, but yeah.
I do want to point something out and see if you agree.
Yeah.
There is nothing that we know that's outside consciousness. So all of this is happening in consciousness.
Yeah, but it feels like he is okay. But yeah, because I saw this image a few years ago. I'm going to try and share it. Let's see. Here it is. If the sharing happens. Nope.
Perhaps you can use your arms and describe it.
Actually, I could. You're going to see why. Try a second time. Oh, right. There it is.
Good.
Nice. So this is something called the sensory homunculus.
Mm-hmm.
Put it full screen. Oh, that wasn't so big, but we'll do it like this. So this is sort of an image of how our sensory organs are mapped within consciousness, within our brain, to say, but that's how they also appear in our consciousness. Sort of how much impression each sense organ impinges upon our consciousness. And it was this sort of image or this idea that made me a bit question, well, can there be a pure experience? As human beings, our constitution is already conditioned in a way to experience the world in a way which isn't sort of, which is not that homogeneous plane where everything has equal value. We are by instinct already attributing value to the world of phenomena. So that's a bit where I was finding it, well, it's difficult to push the limit towards purity in experience. But it is possible, I think, to put our thinking aside and use our constitution, our instrument, as Goethe puts it, in a way in which experience comes to us as unmediated by thinking as possible, which I think would be my way to interpret what pure experience is. So
Can I come at this from a slightly different angle?
so please go ahead and
Uh,
say what do you think about that.
I love that image. It's beautifully grotesque.
Yeah.
So my experience this time in reading through this the last day or so is that I came to the realization that we are cognitive beings through and through, right into, as you've mentioned, right into our physiology, right? But not out of our physiology. Let's be clear about that, because it is our physiological and life processes that we refer to when we're talking about our body and moving through the world and our senses. And so the frame for that is cognition to me. And we think we're not having pure experience, but we're romanticizing this notion of pure experience, I think. What we generally do in the world, and what Volkelt and the Kantian babies do that are around us all the time, is to limit experience to these three factors: this outer, inner, and involuntary conceptual world, that it's bound to both of these given worlds and is so then given itself, right? And so that is pure experience. All of these three are pure experience. They just get more complicated the older we get, right? We think we're having pure experience that is a through line of the spiritual worlds when we're babies, and probably that's the case. But we become self-conscious because we're cognitive beings, but that cognition, it involves senses, it involves feelings, it involves concepts, it involves instincts, it involves experiences that have built up into an intuitional framework that we can just say is there, right? It's just there. And that to me is the pure experience of all of these things. And the next step is to see if we can find out where those things are arising from. And the image that's come to me as relates to cognition, which is all of these fragments. All of these fragments are there because we think, but we don't recognize our thinking as the thing that saturates them, right? That like a many fractured sponge is absorbed. The thinking thinking is saturating all of these all the time. We just don't notice it, and so we can't take it up, which is what the next chapter I think we'll start to get into. So thinking is already unified in all of these things, and we'll discover that. And it's essentially a spiritual activity, whereas what we're talking about is cognition is a physiological activity. That's my assertion here.
We'll pick that apart. Try to remember to come back to that when we do the next session, because we will be going more deeply here. And Steiner's saying we're trying to park ourselves almost exclusively in the idea of pure experience, and then the following three chapters it will be to best extent, like uniquely in like as if the world of experience didn't exist, if we lived in pure thought, somewhat Hegelian type of thing.
Yes, just one thing to add as relates to what I just said, and that is that he makes this great statement basically when he's talking, about appearances toward the end of this end of seven, end of number 7, and he says, is our experience, as I just laid out in the threefold way, is it part of the objects that I'm looking at? I mean, is it inherent to the objects I'm looking at? And that's a question. That is a huge question, because it's only one step to take the next step, right? And he says basically, if that's all that there was, our science could only be taking notes about our experience,
like Volkert was doing.
But it does point to the fact that we are part of the world, right? and it's only through this complicated cognition that we separate ourselves from the world.
Okay. I've got various things that I want to say here. If we start with that really interesting picture, the sensory homunculus. So already when I look at that picture, I recognize the bias towards the physical body. The heart, how was that represented in that figure? The eyes, were they bigger? What about thinking? He had this little tiny head. I mean, tell me about any experience that you have where your thinking isn't involved. So this homunculus reveals the bias of this. It's sensory impressions, and this is what Jeff was talking about to my mind. Sensory impressions are perceived to be like that which belongs to the senses, but Steiner is saying pure experience doesn't just include like all the things that come to us through our senses, but the whole inner life, the whole gamut of inner experience that we have, feeling and thoughts themselves as well. So that was interesting. It's nice to have a picture to talk around, because it allows us to flesh out. Yeah, we got biases going on in that picture, and it helps to highlight what is going on at the end of 7 when Steiner says we're talking about the appearances, and appearances are inner and outer sense activity. He's really specific about that, and he carries that through to the philosophy of freedom.
And when cognition is thought oriented as involuntary, it's the objectification of that nature, which is why everything appears to be unrelated. So not only is that because that cognition is connected to a static group of senses that we don't relate to each other.
Where's the glue? Where's the glue holding it all together? Yeah.
Can I just say?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with you that, yeah, there's more dimensions to experience than simply the physical body. I think my point was both point and question, is that for me, I think I equate pure with the absence of a filter. That our experience can be unfiltered. And that would be pure. And that's a little bit what I am sort of wondering if, or just trying to point out, maybe that's not what he means by pure.
I think it means glueless.
Glueless. Oh, okay.
I think it means involuntary too. I agree with that description. And I think it means yeah, I'll just stay with that. Involuntary, glueless, unrelated, fragmented. And I think I have come to this idea, and we'll talk about it next time, I'm quite sure. But if we pick up his description of Goethe as a personality and your description of us as instruments, then I think it's important that we do have mediated experiences. But those mediated experiences are a thinking self, not something you let go of. That there's a reason, from an esoteric Christian point of view, why the word became flesh, became a personality, in order to transform these involuntary and saturate these involuntary cognitive processes, in a certain sense, you could say. There is an identity with the physical body that needs to be killed and resurrected, but that's not the true self, right? That's not the self that is the agent inside this thinking that is the glue. And so I think I threw out the mediator with the bathwater a while ago, and I'm bringing it back into my purview. You have to develop the mediator in yourself in order to meet the archetypal mediator in the universe.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you brought back in involuntary. I was emphasizing on that, which unites it together. But that you highlighted incredibly importantly, and it will become increasingly important, this idea that I am not involved in the production of these things that are becoming my experience. There is something in me where I am intimately involved, but that's coming next time as well. But sort of a couple of further reflections on to what extent we're trying to or not trying to recreate pure experience. I think this links in one of the ways in which it is interesting to think about it is in terms of Goethe's process is when we looked at chapter 1, 2, and 3, another one of the key points that was mentioned is the way in which scientists impose their conceptual framework on reality, on experience, which is the proper correct technical term. They impose their concepts and then they're trying to determine whether they are true or not. And Steiner in 1, 2, and 3, he talks about how scientists with their own conceptual frameworks look back on Goethe and saying, yeah, he was right because he did this, and he was wrong because he did this. And this is not the art of seeing that we are trying to get our heads around here. The idea is that we are trying to not bring in concepts that don't belong to a process here, so to experience, that we are trying to let the phenomena talk its own language, reveal. And in one of the ways, so we've got these, let's say we're studying we'll take the plant because it's Goethean. Okay, so we study the different phases of growth from seed to all the way through the process until it becomes seed again, which we talked about last time. And in this glueless world, in the world of pure experience, they just sort of they appear. They appear when one thing's there's this, and then there's this, then there's this, then there's this, then there's this, just like follicles today, and there's no glue joining them together. But what Goethe does is he holds these images in his head, so in his soul, and glue starts to be created. It's what is it that's unifying these percepts? Okay, these experiences that's in this particular case his eyes are giving him. So I don't see it, I don't experience Steiner here as trying to lead us back to what's it like to have pure experience. He's talking about the importance of doing it from the perspective of creating a true epistemology. Because epistemology is about the marriage of experience with a conceptual knowledge. And so in these 4 chapters here, he's really emphasizing, so we've got this one pole, we've got experience. What can we say about it without already imposing certain concepts onto it? And I'm going to come to a major one that he talks about with Wale, for example, a little bit later in the chapter. So what is experience without us injecting our own thinking into there, rather than letting experience talk to us? In actual fact, I don't know whether does he use the word kenosis in chapter 4? I'm just going to go and look at I learned a new German word, Entäußerung, which is in 4. I just want to see how they translate it in the English, because it is this idea of observing without the I being involved. Let's just see. It's paragraph 5. Let's just see if I can find it. What's the Entäußerung? Paragraph 5. Oh, that's 4. Complete exclusion is the way they complete exclusion of what we ourselves bring to. I'll just read the whole sentence. Pure experience is the form of reality in which reality appears to us when we confront it to the complete exclusion of what we ourselves bring to it. That's glueless. Involuntary gluelessness is one way of describing it. And this is fundamental for creating an epistemology based in human experience, and I think this is why he's getting us to try and understand what it means not to inject ourselves into phenomena. And the one way in which he does this very clearly is 5:11. So chapter 5, I need to go there to the English. In chapter 5, paragraph 11, he talks about Richard Wale and his epistemology there. And he says that basically he's making the same mistake as Kant and Volkelt do. What they are unconsciously doing is they are injecting the subject into experience, into pure experience. And this is where he says Volkelt is not being true to his own definition of pure experience. Because initially, prior to thinking, the experience of the self is just one experience of the many that we have. We have light, we have sound, we have feelings, and we have a sense of self. And those are just observations. And it is they have injected that into a fundamental characteristic of reality, and so like as a starting point for a theory of knowledge. And Steiner saying, no. If we're going to take this idea of pure experience, which Volkelt describes so well, it's like if we're going to take it sincerely, then also we have to eject the subject from this pure experience. It's not there. So it is there, but we can't put it at the beginning of a theory of knowledge because thinking has already inserted it in there. And when we understand that the experience of the self is just that initially, an experience amongst the multiplicity of experiences that there are for that which perceives in consciousness, then we realize that we can't have that. It's like as a starting point for a theory of knowledge, we've already injected something into it.
Yes, our modern day thinking is a voluntary, involuntary act.
Yeah.
In other words, it couches the self in some sort of kernel that it sees as problematic associated with the process of knowledge and seeks to sort of jettison it, right? But in doing so, it makes the subjective absolute in relationship to knowledge and reality. It makes everything merely personal when it's trying to get rid of affect. It allows for a fetishizing of affect, and I mean, this is why our medical science, for example, produces addictive and iatrogenically the whole business model is an iatrogenic one, where the illness is caused by the treatment, and this compounds into a plethora of chronic illnesses. It's not science then. It's pragmatic technocracy, but it is this is where it turns, right? Is that oh, you're not an expert. How can you talk about this? Well, because I can see that your science it lacks glue. It's non-interdisciplinary. So the neurologist thinks the neurologist has thinking figured out, and right, and the geneticist thinks that they have thinking figured out, and nowhere is there a thinking self that they've taken into account and then phenomenologically re-involved as a scientific process. And that's my old harangue about psychology, why it's an absolute failure.
Just to continue with what Jeff's saying, so that bit about Varle, so introducing, and how this is also a failed attempt at an epistemology, because you're inserting something that doesn't belong to pure experience. He also, I think, to re-emphasize the importance of this, also something that's easy to miss in the philosophy of freedom. But here he's like, in the next chapter, chapter 6, he's like saying, look, what we've done is we've added the predicate subjective to experience without realizing that we've then gone beyond pure experience when we start giving it essential natures. If it's not clear now, then it will, I believe, become clearer when we start looking at thinking as well. And these ideas, they take time to grow in us, to reveal sort of what they are saying. But we've injected something into experience which isn't there initially. We've injected something into a theory of knowledge that doesn't belong there. It's part of experience, and this is what the whole book is about. It's trying to establish the theory of knowledge inherent in Goethe's writings, which Goethe himself is not conscious of, and he's trying to make it explicit to us what is actually going on when Goethean performs his scientific experiments.
And he does so without claim. In fact, in this last chapter, he sort of points to the difference between making a claim. He uses the idea of a professional who you could to the likelihood or perhaps even the fact that he behaves differently in his profession than he does at home. It's just pointing to something, right? And this is what he's able to do at the level of these existential crossroads that we're talking about. These existential aspects that hold together when thinking is brought into play. He's in this last chapter, but this whole group, he's pointing to this next step. Just point, but it's there. It's phenomenologically there. I really encourage people to read along with us, because this is an experience you get to have. So, what a gift, right?
Yeah, I just want to chime in a bit and say, first, interesting, and thank you, Angus, for bringing a bit more clarity into Steiner's critique of Völkel here, and this aspect of the fallacy of subjectifying our knowledge. I mean, for me, I think I've seen this from maybe a similar perspective, but how I experienced in my own sort of acquaintance and deepening of Goethean science. One thing we were speaking about was this the pure experience of being a baby, which I think we can't retrieve.
Mhm.
So in a way, it's important, I think, to understand that we have to depart from where we are, which for me means that I think you will agree with this, because it it's in agreement with Steiner's view of the evolution of consciousness. We are in a place in the history of consciousness where we experience ourselves separated from the world, isn't it? And I think we I see it in myself, arriving as an adult at that experience as well, and
Mhm.
finding Goethean science as a way to reconnect with the world. Yeah, as you say, reconnect and glue myself back together with the world.
Mm.
So in that sense, experience is pointing to, it's pointing to that state, I think, we had as when we were born, but it needs to come from our present condition. So we can't retrieve, we can't go back.
Mm.
So, and I think that was a little bit what I was sort of struggling with and trying to point out, that, yeah, we are where we are, and we have the instrument that we have. And we could think, well, the instrument is perfectly tuned to have a pure experience. We don't need to change our instrument. We just need to learn how to use it. And as you were giving this example of the flower and using phenomenology of the plant, actually, as one example, we're moving into an area of or rather cognition or knowledge that is beyond the verbal. That's how sometimes, that's the term I like to use. It's post-verbal. So I see our condition as we are, when we are born and as childs, as pre-verbal.
Mm.
And we are then acquiring thoughts about, we're acquiring concepts and thoughts about the world. And we arrive at the state which mirrors the current state in the evolution of consciousness, where we can name things, we can share these names between each other, we can understand each other, but they're still pointing to bits out there that are disconnected from each other. And we ourselves feel disconnected from all those bits. So I think that's what we have to sort of acknowledge as the place where we have arrived, but it's also the starting point for diving into and uncovering what Steiner is trying to present us here. And pure experience becomes, something that it becomes post-verbal. It's something after this state of separation in which we have arrived. And what is difficult there is then, how do we share? I think maybe we'll come back to this later on, but how do we share those experiences with each other in a way that we can become sure that they're pointing to an objective knowledge? Which that is what, if I understand it correctly, that's what philosophers have been struggling with in the past 2 or 3 centuries. And that's why science has put experience aside it's our difficulty to be precise and sure about our experience of the phenomenal world in a way where we can share it with each other, agree about what we are experiencing, and doing things with those experiences in the same way that mechanical science does things with the world and produces, machines and whatever. So that's a difficulty that we need to meet and find a way to go beyond.
That's why we're doing this work, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, it's an existential necessity. It's the real. What you just did was describe the meaning crisis, and the solution to it, in a very warm and intimate and living way, right? We're all casting about trying to figure this out, but you can't approach it with a worldview already baked in. Even a Goethean worldview, right? This is the thing about Goethe that is very significant, that he didn't feel a need to explain his methodology. He just experienced it as providing, as joining with the reality around him. And but you're right, because we are self-conscious beings, because we feel ourselves even more alienated than in Steiner's time, even more fractured, coerced at every turn to not think for ourselves. It becomes even more important that this is the nadir. This is the point at which it all turns, and we all have access to this leverage into reality that's post-verbal.
Jeff, I saw you noting down something. Was there something else you wanted to share? It looked like you say, "Oh, I want to mention that."
Well, not. I don't think so, because it has to do with an experience of the way in which we are involved in evolution as a whole, and how evolution of consciousness plays a role, an extraordinarily important role. But this comes in, I believe, is going to be coming in as something we can point to as we bring thinking on stage. It was just something that Alexander said about the evolution of consciousness, and it's key. So it's very important in understanding the epistemological reality that we are participating in on an ontological level, the generative relationship we have with the cosmos.
To my mind, we've covered all of the key areas. There's one thing as well. This is more of a languagey thing, but it is interesting if how these things read differently in the German. And I just want to. This is just a reflection on language and how it impacts us. But there's this German word, gleichgültig und gleichwertig, which means equivalent, but it can also mean indifferent. And what is so interesting is he uses this word a lot, except when he's trying to describe pure experience, that everything is gleichgültig, gleichwertig. There is that flat, the flat plane that you were talking about, Alexander, that he talks about in that chapter there. He's using this word a lot there. And I after reading it, so like it really struck me, so like how powerful these words were. And I went and looked to the, I correct myself. So I was reading the German, and it's a practice that I've got into now of reading the German but rephrasing it in English. And I was thinking, so like, what is a good word that captures that? And so a valid translation is equivalent. But I had to, if you looked at my notes, you would see I space it out with equivalent. And then it sort of like suddenly pops that really, what is it to like to live in a world where every impression has the same value? It is equivalent. And these are like little pointers as to how also we've got this subconscious process of language going on in us. And if we can also find ways to challenge that, this also helps. Conversation is a fantastic way as well. But looking at language nuances that are going on are also ways of teasing out what is going on here. One of those things that we're really going to be teasing out next time is this monster word in German. It's not a monster word. It's the word erkennen, which often gets translated as cognition. And it's in English, we really struggle. And so when we move to the next 3 chapters, we try to stick in the realm of experience and try clear limits, delimit the space that we're in. When we begin to look at the world of thinking, what is it? We're going to be really sort of delving into sort of delimiting what is going on there. And one of the things that we're going to have to look at is, how is cognition not thinking? And how is knowledge neither of the others? And how are they different? And as we begin to do that, we are really not only are we thinking about thinking, like entering into that exceptional state, but we are also gaining clarity on what Jeff was talking about at the beginning. This activity, which is in like every active conscious moment, every living moment of our experience, we are thinking about things. It's there the whole time. But what is this thing? What is it? And the next 3 chapters really do a fantastic job of beginning to make us feel we are getting to know ourselves better, and not only ourselves, but it's like one of the most essential aspects of our nature, of our human nature. So I'm really looking forward to digging more into that, and hearing both of your thoughts and reflections. Would anybody like to chime in with what might be the last thought?
And just to echo a bit what you said about equivalence, because that sort of brought up in me the sense that this chapter has very much to do with being in contact. Yeah, again, and this is what he ends, like the last chapter is calling upon the experience of every single reader, which is an interesting title. So it's not about trying to understand what experience is, finding a definition of experience, which I feel now was a bit what I was struggling with in the beginning. But coming to meet my act of experience and doing it without preferences, without a bias, because that's the only way in which every phenomena will be equivalent, to use your word. That's the only way in which I can meet the world of phenomena in an open, curious, positive, or open and curious way. Let's leave it.
Without preconceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, and that without preconceptions, but also meeting every phenomena as they come to us, because it's easy just to disregard experiences sometimes because there's a bias against them. So
Yeah.
that's thank you for bringing that.
Yeah. False equivalencies are the bias, right?
Thank you for that wonderful summary there, Alexander. I'm going to press stop on the recording.